Alrighty, welcome back. Here is our last final part. We're going to wrap it up. Talk about, could we do this nationally? Could we raise all our beef on grass, all rotationally managed nationally? Well, before you answer that question, we got to understand why we have what we have. Because what we have didn't just appear overnight. It's a history, long development, well over 100 years. So I want to start with the information division. Any article that you see talks about beef these days seems to start with Upton Sinclair in the Jungle, written about the evils of the Chicago meatpacking industry in 1904 or something like that. It's like 120 years ago. We don't do this anymore because we learned it is really bad. So we don't do it this way anymore. Nobody does. Yet we still start all of our articles, or lots of the articles, with Upton Sinclair in the Jungle. And that led to the Federal Meat and Poultry Inspection Acts. And this is a copy of the 83 one. It's been updated since then. Been updated a whole bunch of times since it was written in response to the problems that we were having in 1910. And that's a political act. This is also what says that the United States Department of Agriculture must inspect all meat that is sold by the pound for commercial sale. All right, so we've got this whole system of meat inspections, and that drives so much of what we do in the United States. We have social stuff. This is a typical food budget of the typical family in the United States. Food 10 to 20%. It's also really interesting when you look at that, the majority of that's actually not spent on food for consumption at home. It's spent on eating out, fast food and things like that. That's economic and social there. And then there's infrastructure. This little map is from a few years ago. These are the main beef processing plants in the United States. Yeah, this is the ones that process the beef in our commercial system. You can see that there are none in Virginia or West Virginia or Tennessee or the Carolinas or Georgia or Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Indiana, Ohio, and all sorts of other places. The closest one to us is in Philadelphia. The commercial beef processing plants are out in the Midwest. All right, so that's why we've got what we've got, and that's a whole other presentation. You spend a lot of time talking about that. So that's where we are. This is also how we use our land. I think this Forbes is the source of this nice little graphic. Different things spread out all over the United States. You know, food we eat right there in the center, rural housing, urban housing, cows on pasture and range. So there it is. In the United States, on our cattle census, we have 78.9 million cattle that are out there on that pasture and range. Almost 15 million cattle on feed. I mean, we're shoving food in the front end of them. And 127 million acres of livestock feed. So that's right there sitting over Tennessee on that little map. So what if we converted all that livestock feed to pasture? If we did that, we could provide 8.6 acres per cow for those 14.7 million cattle that are on feed. Now, is 8.6 acres per cow enough? Well, it is in Virginia. There's plenty in Virginia. Maybe in some places in Kansas and other places in Kansas, not anywhere near it. Right? So there's a real question as to whether that could work. But, you know, maybe we're not thinking about the problem correctly. Remember, this is a big problem. It's hard to cover it in one slide. Any guess what the largest irrigated crop in the United States is? If you're thinking it's a food crop, it's not. If you're thinking it's an animal food crop, it's not. It is our front lawns. Turf grass, lawn grass, is the largest irrigated crop in the United States. And if we wanted to, if we were just looking at our front lawns, we could raise 120 million sheep on our front lawns. How about that? And then we wouldn't have to use any gas to cut them. We wouldn't have to use any electricity to cut them with an electric weed eater. We wouldn't have to do anything. We just put the sheep on them, and when it came November and the grass not growing anymore, we just butcher the sheep and eat them. Doesn't cost us anything. All right, so if we want to fix our livestock program, right? What does it take to fix it? Well, we got to agree on the fix. Not all of us are going to say the same thing is going to work. And what works for me might not work to feed New York City. Remember that 80% of the population living in 20% of the land. Yes, you can do urban agriculture. Kind of hard to do it in Manhattan for the number of people that live on Manhattan. By the way, it is Detroit. No, it's Detroit. Detroit's doing some really neat things with urban agriculture because of the population loss that they've had, and they've got the space to do it. We got to have some different laws, right? Because look at the mess we've gone through in Lexington about just getting chickens. You can call up True Green and get True Green to show up and spray chemicals on your yard for days. Put a little sign out there that says, don't go in the yard because there's too many chemicals on it. But we won't let people put a chicken on it. And by golly, we certainly won't let anybody put a sheep on it. I mean, really, who would want sheep on their front lawn? Well, would you believe Woodrow Wilson put sheep on the front lawn of the White House during World War I? He said, with a war going on, I can't really justify manpower used to cut the grass, so we'll just pasture sheep on it. We got to have different infrastructure. I mean, we have what we have. It works with what we have. If we want to convert our crops to grazing lands, we're going to need something different to do that. We're going to need a different processing system to do that. We're going to have to think differently. We're going to have to quit thinking about those front lawns as something to be mowed and pristine, and maybe think about those as a place to actually raise some of our own food. Or if we don't want to do that, allow our neighbors to raise their own food. We're going to have to think about economics differently. Grass-fed cattle, at least the breeds I raise, you can butcher them at 2 years. They do a little bit better at 2.5 or 3. The beef's better. There's more of it. But that means it might cost a little bit more. But then again, you eat less of it. Because I will flat out tell you, I don't think it's just because I'm getting older. I'm very satisfied with 6 or 8 ounces of my steak. It fills me up. I think because it is better food. It's more nutrient dense. It's better raised, got better fat in it, better nutrients, better minerals. And so if it costs a little more, but you eat a little less, maybe it comes out in the balance. We got to think differently. Different societal understanding, right? We're used to that. We're used to going to the grocery store and just picking something up, and it's just there, and we don't have to think very much about it, and it doesn't cost us very much. We have gotten very, very, very used to cheap food, just like we've gotten used to cheap energy. And if we want to do something different in the environment or the arena of raising beef, raising lamb and mutton, raising goat, raising anything else on pasture, we're really going to have to think differently and then put the systems in place to do that. Now, this is one of the advantages of small farms. Small farms very often can, small anything really, can drive innovation because we can afford to take risks. I can afford to try something with 2 or 3 cows. If you're dealing with a farmer that's got 3,000 cows and a whole lot invested in that, they tend to want to stick to what they know works. Yes, something else might be better, but before they're going to that, they've got to know it's better. They can't take a risk with 3,000 cattle. Right? So this is one of the great things that small farms can do for us is experiment and try some of these things out and figure out what it actually takes to get it done. And then that can help change all of these things I've got listed here on the slide. All right, so what can you do? Ask for better laws for local food systems. Because I tell you, Pennsylvania's got some really good laws. New York actually has some laws that are better than Virginia does. Virginia's laws for local food systems, frankly, aren't very good. Ask for small changes first. Small changes are easier to implement. They're easier to get through the political process, and they actually have the biggest return on investment. Small changes are easy and can give you a big bang for your buck when you make that change. Vote wisely with your dollars. Right? Your dollars are votes. I didn't come up with that. I've heard all sorts of smart people say it. Right? But your dollars, your spending habits shape the world that you want to see in the future. Here's some local folks that do grass-based systems. Lots of these folks, probably all of them, are better at this than I am. They know more than I am. These are the folks you should have had here speaking to you because they're better than I am. The only advantage I have is I'm just willing to come and talk. All right, so we have lots of great farmers. And then thumbnail, it's like using 20% of the agricultural land in Rockbridge County, we could feed Rockbridge County. And that leaves 80% of our agricultural land to feed somebody else. So this is not a question of either or. We can actually do both here in this phenomenal place that's Rockbridge County. And the last thing, research and speak very carefully. Because remember that United Nations number, 14.5%. The number's wrong. Right? I'm sorry, but the number's wrong. Once it gets out, it stays out. And you have to be very, very careful. And so do I. Because I've checked everything in this presentation. I've got the sources. I've double-checked it. I've done everything I can to make sure that what I say is correct and is supported by the research. So in closing, I want to address some of the comments that made in the papers and the back and forth. By the way, I love our paper. I love the back and forth and debates and everything else. Because, you know, that's actually how we get good. That's how we learn, is we debate and we argue with each other. So one of the letters said, cows are heavy and compacted soil is slow to heal. The statement is true, but it lacks context because it implies that this is what always happens, and that is not true. Overcompaction is bad. It's called pugging. It pugs up the soil, and the soil gets really, really dense, and everything dies there, and nothing but weeds will grow. You can see this on our farm, where there were hay rings that were put in the past, and the hay rings were never moved. They just dumped more hay and more hay and more hay. I can take you to places, and there hadn't been a hay ring there in about 20 years, and it's still bad. And we are working on fixing that. Some areas we've got it fixed in, other areas we are still working on. But kind of everybody knows that now. So farmers don't do that anymore. They don't just leave the hay ring there. They move the hay ring. They unroll the hay bales. They spread the hay bales. So if you look up on the side of a hill and wonder why that hay was rolled down the hill, it's to prevent this problem. But that little compaction that each of those cow hooves cause, if you manage the movement where the cow isn't compacting the same place over and over and over again, then that little divot opens up a place for water retention. It opens up a place for seeds to fall. It breaks down cover crops and materials so they trample things. Because I tell you, I put hay out over broom sedge, and it tramples the broom sedge, which is something I'm trying to get rid of. And in that case, this managed compaction is good for the soil. That's what the buffalo did, but they didn't do it in the same place all the time. There was another statement that was made. Cows are not very efficient at turning those plants into food, into human food. I'm sorry, this is not true. It may be true that they are inefficient at turning grain into food. I don't know. When you do the whole life cycle thing, I think it probably is true. It causes all sorts of rumen acidosis and all sorts of problems in the cow, because that's not what the good Lord made a cow to eat. Cow's an herbivore. It eats grass. That's what it does. So here's some of our cows right here. I think that's Moonshine and her calf a couple years ago. And they are about ready to move from where they are, where the grass is short, to the right side of that pasture where the grass is tall. And cows have 4 stomachs. Monogastric animals like me and you and horses and pigs get very little value off of that hay or grass. But the ruminants with their 4 stomachs, clear winners. Carolyn Carius wrote this great book on small-scale livestock farming on grass. She's also a civil engineer like me, so she's one of my favorite people. But the cow is designed to turn all of that fiber which we cannot eat. I challenge any of you to come out to my farm, find 10 pounds of food you can eat out there. It's not there. I can't eat any of that. Well, at least not and live very long. But the cow sure can. And a cow can turn that food that we can't eat, that grass, that fiber, into meat and milk and leather, well, pre-leather anyway, for almost no input of energy. And this is where they really shine. For every cow I've got out there, I've got a sheep. Sheep they eat different stuff. Also ruminants. They also make wool. Saw something out of England about the amount of carbon sequestered in wool all the time. Right? Turn it into wool, turn it into clothing, and voila, you've sequestered carbon in wool. So this is what our ruminants are really good at. They take all that stuff that we cannot eat, that grows in places that are not suitable for tillage, that grows in arid environments and wet environments and all sorts of different places, and turns it into food that we can eat, milk that we can drink, fibers that we can wear. And they are phenomenally efficient at that if we use them correctly. So, good grasslands sequester carbon and make oxygen, kind of important to all of us. Increase organic content in the soil, reduce runoff, like 30%. Right? So a managed rotational grazing pasture will have 30% runoff, less runoff than a conventionally managed pasture. Expand habitats, I've told you about that. And there it is, food and fiber for us with minimal energy inputs. That is their genius. But to get good grasslands, you got to have management. You can't just turn the critters out, or they'll, like us, they'll go to the dessert bar first. And they'll walk all over everything else to eat dessert. It's got to have grazers. Grasslands without grazers go stale. They get unhealthy, just like we talked about on the prairie. Grazers got to have predators. Otherwise, we end up with too many grazers. And maybe we need some fire as well. Right? I got areas in my pastures that they need a good burning. Some last thoughts. Again, I don't know everything. I don't know the solutions to all the farming problems. I don't do it perfectly. We got a lot of stuff on our farm we are working hard to fix. We'll probably be working hard to fix it until the day I die, and then somebody else will keep working at it. But all farmers care. Doesn't matter about method. All of us want the same thing. It's kind of funny you talk to them. All farmers want the same thing. They want to see their kids on that farm. They want to see that farm function for another generation. Farmers are not the enemy of the environmentalist and the conservationist. Wendell Berry wrote that about 30 years ago. So the worst thing the environmental movement did was make farmers the enemy. Because we care about the land. We care about what we're doing. We care vitally. We've got farms in this county that have been in the same family for 5 generations. You don't get a farm to function for 5 generations if you don't care about the land and the environment and the soil and the grass and the animals. Farmers respond to economic arguments. This is how we make our living. We make our living off the land. And if you can tell a farmer a way to make $5 more while working 2 less hours, that farmer will listen. Right? So it's got to work economically for the farmer. Farmers respond for better ways of doing things. And I will flat out tell you, I have learned all sorts of things from folks smarter than me that farm differently from I do. Right? Different means different. Different doesn't mean better. And I learned from them. I hope they learn from me. And we trade these things because all of us are trying to do the same thing. We're trying to do things better. All these farmers know things. You know, again, you got these multi-generational farmers, these farm families. There's knowledge there. There's 5 generations of knowledge passed from father to son and mother to daughter on through these whole families. Listen to them. They'll talk to you if you listen to them. This is a multi-dimensional problem. It's a huge problem. It is both complex and complicated. By the way, those aren't the same things. Look them up. How many calories does it take to deliver a calorie? I'm recording this in February. If you go to Kroger and buy a grape, you can buy a fresh grape in Kroger. Where did it come from? Not from Rockbridge County. They ain't in season here for 6 months. It might have come from Chile. How many calories did it take to get that handful of grapes from Chile? We look at the land, carbon, water, biodiversity, heat, erosion. There's just 1,000 parameters here. System boundaries matter. You know, what do we include in our analysis? What do we not include in our analysis? And so when you look at all these things on this problem, it doesn't mean we can't do anything, but it does mean that anybody says, all we have to do is, fill in the blank, doesn't matter what it is, all we have to do is rotational grazing. That's not right. Right? It's not. Because of all of these things I've listed here. Very complicated and complex system. And remember, that farmers are feeding the 80% of the people that live on the 20% of the land. It really is that way, both in the Commonwealth and in the United States. And finally, it's not about the cow, it's about the how. The cow's just a thing. You can raise cattle very badly, and it won't be good for the cow, it won't be good for the environment, it won't be good for the land, and it won't be good for the people that eat the cow. Or you can raise them very well. The exact same thing is true of tillage. We can have really good gardens, or we can have really bad gardens. We can do really good row crops or really bad row crops. And remember that Dust Bowl from the 1930s? The Dust Bowl didn't happen because there was too much prairie. The Dust Bowl happened because we tilled the prairie under. All right. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm glad to be able to make the recordings and share them with you. Again, my name is Steve Hart. We are Hartland Farm. We are 5 miles west of Lexington on West Midland Trail. You can come visit us anytime, and I hope that you will. Have a good evening.